Hi everyone and welcome. When we moved into our home 2 years ago, everything was so dark. The walls were khaki, the kitchen cabinets were dark brown, and the floors were also super dark. So we ripped out the floors, we did something new, we repainted the whole house either white to really brighten it up, and I was really content with how the kitchen looked for a while. However, with a lot of young children, they were dinged up, so it was time to paint them. And I was so excited with my new bright kitchen. This looks white, but it actually isn't. It's agreeable gray, and I'll kind of show you some of the steps that I did of how I broke everything down and painted my cabinets. Now, like I said before, my walls are either white. So in the kitchen, they don't look very white. Here you can see against the wall, they're very white. But in the kitchen, they're quite yellowy and tan. That's just because of the lighting and how it hits. So here on my cabinets, you can see they aren't in the best of conditions. There's handprints, scratches everywhere, stickers, just really not the cleanest cabinets. There is gunk from the previous owner's baby stuff, and you can just see that they're just peeled apart on the top. So it is definitely time to get these clean. So soap and water is probably one of the best first steps that you can do. If you are planning on completely refinishing them, I ended up grabbing a putty knife and just kind of getting them into corners, getting any type of grease out. If yours are really bad, I heard that there's something called TSP. That's good for the grease. Here, I took off all of the gunky little bumpers stickers that are on the back of the cabinets for a softer close. Here you can see some of the grease that I picked up from the cabinet above the stove. It was really gross. But after you clean everything, then you can finally take off the doors. So all of my doors, I actually put in the basement to paint, so I'm not going to really show all of that. But it is important to make sure that you're taping off areas that you might get paint onto that you're not wanting to. So just simple little places. This is a little tip. I have kid Mega Blocks, so I use that to be able to lift up my doors. Because they're not the nice little pyramids, I can't do one side and then the other at the same time. So it did take me a little bit longer because I needed a side to completely dry before flipping it over. But that's just how things are. Here you can see a little bit of sanding going on. I used 100 and it was a little bit gritty when I was using my hand, so I would suggest something closer to 150. The store recommended 220, but that's for a little bit more finer sanding, and I don't think that was enough to really knock down the gloss on my stain to be able to get the primer to adhere. So I would stick with 150. I feel pretty safe about that. I decided to keep my hinges on because if you can see here, the screw's at the top, and then here the screw is at the bottom. So I was a little bit concerned that if I took off my hinges, even if I said this one goes here and this one goes there, that I was going to have some adjustment problems. And I didn't want to spend all the time refiguring my cabinet doors. So I'm able to get behind the hinges quite easily, just taking my 1.5 inch angled brush, and it gets right in there. No big deal. If I get a little bit of paint on the hinges, that's not a big deal because paint scratches off of metal pretty easily. So I decided to leave them on. I figured the extra time to go around it would probably be less or equal to the time it would take for me to readjust everything. So I went to Benjamin Moore for everything. I got the primer there, Pure Seal. I feel like this was a pretty good primer. I didn't pay for the extra $10 one, but I felt like this did its job. And I have a 4-inch roller. 4-inch was perfect. You really need a roller when you're doing the paint for all of your flat surfaces, just to try to get rid of as many brush strokes as possible. I forgot a paint tray on my first run to the store, so I'm using this cardboard box with plastic over it just to make it work for the primer. I'll get an actual one when I go back for paint. Now with the paint, I haven't even decided what color yet. I figure I'll let the white primer go on and then I can decide what color I like best. Here I have Agreeable Gray and Cotton Gray. And so I'll just kind of see how it goes and which one I prefer. Finally, I have done one coat of primer on everything. Now, one thing I forgot to mention before is that you need to make sure to mark everything. So mark all of your doors where they go, and the drawers I marked as well with an arrow pointing towards which is the top of the drawer, because it's not like those holes for your handles are going to be exactly in the middle. That's pretty difficult to do, and if you flip it the other way, it might not line up as nicely. So make sure you get that done. Here we're looking at some of the primer. It's a little bit blotchy, not perfect. Primer's really thin, but primer's just primer. You don't need to have a perfect coat on it. Run your hand through and make sure that after each step that you are sanding with a 220, you want to be able to give yourself as much of a smooth surface as possible. Up here, I noticed that where the molding was joining, that there is some gaps. It wasn't noticeable with the dark wood, but going to a lighter wood, I can see that gap now. It does bother me, so I'm going to have to caulk it and just kind of fill that in. Now here I have done one layer on the outside, not on the door fronts or anything, and I did decide to go with Agreeable Gray. So here you can see the color. It's kind of a gray beige color. It looks really good in my house. It looks white in pictures and when you see it, but it actually isn't. It's just how the light plays in my house. So, but when I put this primer on, it was just too white, too stark. It really messed up with everything else. So I went with this Agreeable Gray instead. The first layer went on really well. I'm really happy with it. I don't see many brush strokes because most of this was done with a roller. So far I'm really happy with how this paint has laid down. I ended up doing Benjamin Moore's Advanced paint, but I've also heard great things about their Aura paint if you're wanting to save yourself a couple bucks. Whew, I'm just skipping right to the end here. But basically I did one coat primer and I did 2 coats of paint and I sanded in between each one. Now because I used a satin paint, I do not need a top coat. You could, but I didn't want it to change the coloring or anything. Then also with the hardware, I took it all off and cleaned it and I spray painted it with Rustoleum spray paint bronze. Here's a really good example of where you can see that it is Agreeable Gray. It is not white. It's one shade darker than my walls, and it just looks much better than the white would have with the backsplash and the countertops. So that's why I chose this color. Looks white, isn't. So anyways, with the handles, like I said, it was Rustoleum bronze, and I went with that instead of gold because bronze has a little bit more of a deeper color. Brings in those warmths and looks good with the browns. So I was really happy with this. Also, it was pretty easy to put the doors back on since I kept the hinges on. It was just simple screw, and I was done. I was so happy with it. Now for part 2 of my little kitchen renovation, I'm going to redo this corner. Well, I guess not redo it because there's nothing here and it bothers me that it's just empty. I always put boxes here and recycling and trash, and I want it to feel like a complete kitchen, so that will be my next step. But everything looked great. It wasn't super difficult. This is something that anyone can do, and it only cost about $150, so I don't think there's anything wrong with even just giving it a try. If you're a little bit worried, start with a smaller project, but all it is just paint. If something goes wrong, you can sand it down and do it again.